Hello, today's straight talk is going to be on the subject of the father wound. I'm just going to make an apology in advance in that this is such an important subject to me and such an important subject in the world to my belief that I want to make sure I capture all the thoughts I've had about it in regards to what I want to say in this particular talk. So I am going to be reading from notes. So some of it will be from over here on my computer and some of it is by some writing I've done that is on paper. So my gaze is going to be in different places other than directed at the camera for some of this or most of this particular talk. So that out of the way, I want to first of all touch on the subject of the mother wound. The mother wound is more talked about. You tend to hear this phrase used quite a lot in coaching circles and therapy circles, maybe because women tend to talk more openly about stuff that's emotional, but it tends to refer to a painful disconnect between a daughter and her mother that is difficult to talk about, difficult to express, and it can be limiting to a daughter in some way in her own evolution as an independent adult. That said, it can also be used to describe the same kind of dynamic between a son and his mother, where the relationship holds some anxiety and stress and potentially anger and guilt on both parts, daughter and son, who are going through similar kinds of experience. It's complex, it's multi-layered, so it's not easy to define in a couple of sentences, but the reason I'm touching on it really is just as a touch point, a reference point for talking about the father wound, which I believe is a much, much bigger and more prevalent problem in society today, and that is undermining family. So what I want to say is it's a problem, a significant problem, not just for boys and the wounded men that they become, but also for anybody who loves a father wounded boy and man, and for those around them who are also going to suffer the same repercussions. So it affects everybody, not just the boy or the man, or the boy and the man, but anybody who has a loving relationship around that boy or man. And when you think about the number of fatherless children, it's well known that there are a great many fatherless children in the world today. And just looking at the harms caused by it and how widespread those harms are, not just in relation to family and relationships, but also in terms of the economy and how these problems affect the economies of the world in terms of the things that have to be put in place to deal with the ongoing consequences of a boy who is wounded by a father wound. And I'll get to that more as I go through this talk. Excuse me. So just scratching the surface, mothers are statistically much more often the parent who remains present when family breaks down, when divorce comes along and what have you, than fathers are. According to ONS, there's an estimated 3.8 million children who are fatherless just in the UK at the last time these statistics were taken. This is some information I've only looked up online in the last few days. So I wanted to have a look at some of the underlying causes of fatherlessness and the father wound, how it can come about. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just an overview. So there could be a father wound where a child's father was only interested in showing up for what turned out to be a conception, basically leaving responsibility for birth control to the other party, probably because it wouldn't be actually him who would have to deal with the up close and personal consequences of a pregnancy, at least not directly, and because the patriarchal culture isn't strong on teaching boys about being responsible around sex. Expanding on that, it can't be ignored that there are many young women who also have little to no sense or real understanding about the risk of pregnancy, or who actually maybe even wanted a pregnancy, but had no real comprehension of the possible future repercussions for a potentially fatherless child that she might bring into the world. Almost certainly what figures in that will be at least partly a consequence of maybe her also not having had a father in her life, because it's known that having a father at home is also a positive influence on girls too, and reduces the number of teenage pregnancies because a girl is more grounded when she has a father figure. There are stats around that. I just haven't looked them up prior to this presentation. Another reason this father wound can occur is where a father was emotionally absent or weak, maybe. Those kind of fathers I tend to refer to as paternally challenged. They're there, but they're not very confident or capable or committed in the role of being a father. Many may abdicate completely from that responsibility because it's too overwhelming. They don't feel adequately equipped, perhaps, to be a father. Maybe they weren't fathered well themselves. And some of them, many of them, bunk off, walk away because they can't or don't want to handle the stress of it. It could be that a father passed away. It could be a result of divorce and family breakdown, where fathers perhaps have been excluded by angry ex-partners. It could be by an ill-informed legal system that isn't really equipped to make these kind of judgments, but that does with the inadequate understanding of the consequences, perhaps, of for the child in the future, and many ongoing consequences too. And the legal system has tended to lean toward making access difficult or impossible for fathers who wanted to maintain that relationship with their children, even if the mother doesn't want that. So that can be another issue. It can be a father was incarcerated. Perhaps he was involved in crime, petty crime, serious crime, or maybe he was excluded due to violence towards the mother, domestic violence. It could be through addiction to drugs and alcohol, where it wouldn't necessarily be safe for him to be involved, at least not without careful supervision. And it could be old school fathering, where perhaps there's an authoritarian attitude towards children. There may be domineering behaviour, belittling. It could be that the father's very unloving. He maybe wasn't very loved himself. It could be that he's very critical, that he's cold and unreachable. He may be even abusive. And his own behaviour has driven those children away in many of the ways that really matter. Of course, all children deprived of a loving parent, a loving, present, committed father, and they've suffered a father wound because of that, where some kind of wounding has taken place, and it matters that both mothers and fathers are present, and also for boys and girls. It's just that it's particularly damaging to a boy for reasons that we'll go into if his father isn't present. When we think about role models, perhaps, both mothers and fathers do play a role, and they do play a role for both girls and boys. And where there isn't a father present, mothers can do a lot, and we're going to talk about that too, to counter the loss and the damage that is done to a boy's soul when he doesn't have a father present. So when we're drilling down into identity, where a daughter has a mother present in her life, she obviously has something of an advantage because she's learning how to be, or maybe in some cases how not to be, a woman from the presence of a mother. Whereas a boy who doesn't have a father present is not going to have that same role modelling of masculinity to grow up around, to learn from. And again, it can be to learn negatives and positives from, but if there isn't that role model there at all, then there's a great vacuum where it really is needed that there's a male influence. And I think it's to our collective disadvantage when there's a father wound present, particularly in boys. I am going to talk about that. So what I want to just touch on briefly is obviously there is a huge detriment to boys who don't have that father figure in their lives, but there is also a huge loss to mothers, the mothers who love them, who grieve for their son's broken heart. And that begins to be more noticeable perhaps from around about the age of 7, where a boy would naturally and normally begin to gravitate more towards a father and adult male figures in his life to learn how to be an adult male. And increasingly, as the boy becomes a teenager, when there's raging hormones, there may be raging anger and feelings of rejection and resentment. And very often that can turn towards the mothers around that age, because the boy doesn't have something really important that he misses greatly in his life and may potentially blame his mother for that. So a mother tends to feel this increasingly in those age groups from 7 upwards, and then again more powerfully into teenagehood, when he begins to cut the apron strings, which is actually a really necessary and important part of his growth into manhood. And it can feel really hard for a mother to deal with that, especially if she's not aware this is going to happen. Maybe her first son, maybe she's not had brothers, maybe she's not been aware that this is coming, and it can be a real shock when it does come. And also the painful knowing, if we're fortunate enough to get that insight, hard as it is, that we as mothers cannot solve this issue for our sons. We cannot teach masculinity to our sons, but there is still a lot we can do. There's a loss to sisters and brothers, because we potentially suffer the lost possibilities of a deep and meaningful connection with a brother, because he's so emotionally fractured by his loss that he pushes them away, distances himself from his feelings because they're too painful, and maybe even he blames her in some way for their not having, them, not her, maybe blames siblings because perhaps they're not suffering the same loss that he feels he's experiencing, perhaps because they're stepchildren and have come along later. His father may have disappeared, their father may still be present, but he may not be a good stepfather, or he may not stay around even for his own children. To the direct family unit, there's big losses to the direct family unit and the family of origin that may go on, the family may go on carrying and being divided by the ever-deepening scars of resentment that are cutting the psyche of the father-wounded male in their midst. So these lost boys can become lost, difficult-to-love men who wreak emotional havoc and devastation for other people in their adult relationships, or they become projects for women who sense their pain. As a compassionate human being, they find a sense of purpose perhaps in trying to love a wounded man better, but it doesn't usually end well for a variety of reasons. We're going to look at a few of those reasons. Nobody actually wants to be somebody that needs fixing, or somebody that needs rescuing, or somebody that's perceived as in need of rescue. And though a wounded man might find some sense of comfort in being nurtured, it's likely also that he'll come to resent A, what he perceives as her pity for her and her weakness, and B, the fact that much as she devotes trying to make him feel safe and loved, it's no substitute for the character-forming masculine nurturing that he missed out on as a child, and he may begin to show that through offensive words, rejections, and blaming behaviour that he passes on his wounding to her, to a female partner, and his children potentially. The soft and apparently willing target being offered to him on a plate, while giving her and the children little but grief in return. It isn't rescue that such a man needs, or even a boy. He doesn't need rescue, but to take responsibility as a man anyway for healing as an adult who's been wounded by what may have been a rejection, or certainly an absence of the masculine nurturing he was deprived of in childhood through no fault of his own at that stage. Any female partner of a father-wounded man is highly likely to feel the pain of taking on a project to fix a man through her devotion, and sooner rather than later. And even to the extent where she might suffer some pretty terrible behaviours, such as coercive control, gaslighting and physical abuses, as he desperately searches for his worth by assuming false sense of significance through dominance over somebody else who he may perceive as weaker than himself, causing her untold misery. Some typical symptoms of a father wound: emotional immaturity and emotional unavailability, detachment, withdrawal, disengagement with life and with other people, a lack of trust, suspicion and paranoia about anyone who claims to love them because they feel unlovable, feelings of invisibility, sometimes countered by overt bravado because they don't want the world to know that they're wounded, low to no self-esteem, lack of conviction around things that matter, feeling unlovable, which I've just mentioned, and unworthy of love, a hunger for reassurance, which can make a man very demanding, insecurity, self-destructiveness, underachievement, or possibly overachievement with no feelings of real satisfaction for the achievements that they, manage to pull off in life, and a tendency towards bullying and potentially abusive behaviour. I'm going to switch to my handwritten notes now. So some of the negative consequences for father-wounded boys I'm going to talk about now. So there's an author by the name of Warren Farrell. He's an American political scientist, activist, author of several books on men's and women's issues, a leading figure of the men's rights movement, and co-author of the book The Boy Crisis: Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. He states that the frequency that fathers absent a child's life have been devastating for the development of boys. He pointed out research showing that boys without fathers fare worse than boys with fathers on more than 70 different metrics, including they're much more likely to drink, much more likely to do drugs, much more likely to be depressed, much more likely to be suicidal, much more likely to be violent, much more likely to be in prison, and much more likely to fall behind girls educationally, socially, and in terms of mental health. So let's look at the prevalence. How many boys must have a great big gaping father wound, bearing in mind the estimated 3.8 million fatherless children in the UK? That's just the UK. How many families are being torn apart by this? How is that affecting the rest of us? The economy, as all the measures having to be put in place to deal with the delinquent behaviour, perhaps, of fatherless boys, the addictions, the loss of productivity, the petty crime, and so on. You might think it doesn't affect you at all, but you'd be wrong. There's an African proverb, which I'm going to mention here, something like, the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down just to feel its warmth. Though it's not a perfect analogy, there's much alignment with the danger presented by father-wounded boys, adolescents, and men, and the dismissing of this void for so many males in our society. These boys are hurting, and they may go on hurting well into manhood, and act out their wounding in so many damaging ways. And what's hardest of all for mothers to accept is that we can't fix it, at least not on our own. They'll hurt themselves, they'll develop addictions, become promiscuous and catch STDs. They may throw away their opportunities, destroy their relationships, and some of the other things that we've already touched on. They'll hurt other people. As you know, hurt people, including their devoted mothers that we've already touched on, with bitter, sometimes lifelong resentment for what they see as her role in their not having had their father in their lives. How that can go on and on relentlessly, even until the end of the mother's life, when the opportunities for forgiveness, understanding, acceptance and relief from the anger, blame and punishment dished out to her for so long for her perceived mistake of being long past for the woman who tried so hard to do the right thing to protect her son. It'll be hurtful to our daughters, especially those who grew up around the wounded masculine themselves, uncaringly contributing to the continuance of the problem by indiscriminate. Sorry, I'll start this paragraph again. The way that our daughters will be hurt by uncaring contribution to the continuance of the problem of the wounded masculine by indiscriminately impregnating willing girls who may well have grown up lacking the grounding influence of a loving father to teach them and reinforce the message about how to value themselves in their relationships with the opposite sex, and then later in their marriages to father wounded men who are full of insecurities, resentments, emotional hang-ups, in need of focus for their age, someone to focus that on, someone to direct it at, and yet having no discernible target. So they go on instead for the soft ones, the soft targets, who are desperately trying to fill the hole left by the absenting father, possibly without ever coming to figure out why their partner they love so much is so full of anger, and little knowing that it isn't actually anything to do with them in the first place. They're going to hurt their peers through aggression, rage, threat, and potentially violence. They're going to hurt innocent bystanders with delinquent social behaviour or petty and even serious crime, including, in a small number of cases, committing mass murder as a way to also commit suicide by way of school shootings. As stated by Warren Farrell, 100% of the boys who committed these acts were fatherless. To add to these worrying facts, it's known that boys suffer for a longer time from the devastating emotional consequences of divorce and family breakdown. So what can women do to contribute to solutions? Contrary to what we might think, there's a lot we can do for the father-wounded son. To help a boy's character development, his emotional stability, his sense of self, his healthy psychological evolution. In fact, there's a lot we need to begin to recognise that we must do if we to have such a, pardon me, this is what happens when you read your notes, to begin to recognise that we must do, as we have such a vital and important role to play in bringing about family and social change that's likely to never happen without our active input. So there's different ways that we can look at this. And I've numbered these numbers 1 to 7. So number 1, as women in our own right. Number 2, as daughters of men. Number 3, as sisters of boys and men. Number 4, as partners and wives of men. Number 5, as mothers of boys and men. Number 6, as mothers of daughters. And number 7, as friends and people who love men. So I'm going to talk more about numbers 2, 3 and 7 in future videos, but for now, a few ideas on numbers 1, 4, 5 and 6. So number 1, as women in our own right. Firstly, we have to take steps to protect ourselves from the negative behaviours of father-wounded men who come into our lives as adults. We must stop cooperating with the patriarchal model of how men should relate to and have relationships with women. And we can take responsibility for developing our awareness, getting savvy, and for improving our own communication skills so that we give out congruent messages that we have healthy self-regard. Number 4, as partners and wives of men. Some of the above that I've just mentioned apply here. And also we can work on setting appropriate and healthy boundaries in our relationships with men. We can explore ways to relate in more assertive ways that communicate that we're not willing to tolerate macho bullshit from anyone for any reason, nor to be taken advantage of simply because we love our partner, who may be a wounded man. We can develop our inner resources and our independence so that if need be, we can find the strength and the means to walk away if we need to in order to preserve our well-being when a partner refuses to behave with love, honour and respect towards us and also if he refuses to take responsibility for his own healing. Number 5, as mothers of boys and men, we can demonstrate through our own behaviour, our own more assertive and effective communication, and our commitment to continual growth, what a strong, self-respecting and empowered human being looks like, so they can learn from, up close and personal, what a woman with good self-esteem and self-respect looks like, and learn how to behave respectfully towards girls and women that they meet. We have to develop a level of acceptance too, in the knowing that we, as women, can't fix a boy's father wound, even though there are still things that we can do. We can make sure a son knows that whatever gave rise to his wounding, it wasn't anything to do with him. No deficiency on his part. In other words, we can continually reassure him through our own behaviour and our parenting to help him to embed the recognition deep into his psyche. It's good to keep in mind that half of our son's genetic makeup came from his father, whether he remains present or not, whether he was a good person or not. If we badmouth the father to our son, there's a strong possibility he will internalise these messages and begin to believe that he is that description too, especially as he comes to understand more about life. It can be tough territory to navigate, no doubt about it, especially if his father harmed you. But of course, the boy is not his father, and even if there were or are good reasons to protect your son from your experience, with lots of positive reinforcement from you and other quality adult male influences around you both, he will likely grow up to be a loving, wise and well-rounded man of his own creation, regardless of his genetic inheritance. We can nurture in them a sense of honour for their own emotions and feelings so that they learn to have empathy and compassion towards those of others too. We can make it a commitment to seek out good, safe and reliable adult male influences in their lives as they're growing up. For mothers of boys who have a present father, but one who they feel isn't stepping up or showing the commitment that they'd like, in other words, fathering by their own parenting standards, if we're sure of his love and have no safety concerns, we can work to trust him more to find his feet in his own way, to demonstrate that trust by backing off to give him his own space as a dad, without appearing to be monitoring his every move and being ready to jump in with critique or advice, unless he directly asks for that. And we can be encouraging of his engagement, especially if he didn't have a very positive experience of being fathered himself. The less mothers appear to be claiming the ground as their domain alone, the more trusting mothers can be. The more open a less than confident dad might be willing to be in his communication, so that both parents can work together to ensure their sons and daughters, of course, are their joint number one priority. It might also be an idea to gently drop in a very casual way, without harping on about it or making it conditional, to see if there are any men's groups locally where an insecure or unsure father can find masculine support, but only with great care and diplomacy. Finally, number 6, as mothers of daughters, we can demonstrate through our own behaviour, this is much as with mothering boys, our own more assertive and effective communication on our commitment to continual growth with what a strong, self-respecting and empowered human being looks like. We can teach them how to value themselves enough to say no when pressured for sex by a boy, and to wait until they feel ready and they're ready to invest more in their relationship once they feel safe, valued and respected. We can teach them how to do all that safely. We can build up our daughters so that they're aware of the risks and don't become vulnerable to wanting to fix wounded boyfriends or to be vulnerable to teen pregnancy, for example. Finally, I want to put this out there. Maybe we almost have to relearn or to learn again a new non-violent language as described by somebody called Marshall Rosenberg. He talks about non-violent language. I tend to not use that phrase because the education system didn't teach us how to have successful, healthy relationships, how to negotiate, how to find compromise, how to deal with conflict, how to set and uphold healthy boundaries, and many other totally radical communication skills. Can we do it with a sense of fun, adventure, and perhaps most importantly of all, with a sense of humour? In my opinion, there's no doubt about it. We need to communicate differently. Perhaps the bigger issue is it important enough to make us willing to do the work? That's it from me for today. Thank you for listening. I hope that's been helpful. Please feel free to comment and to share. And if you do engage with the conversation, please do so respectfully and politely so that we can remain in open dialogue and learn from one another as we move forward. And please also consider subscribing if these videos have been of interest to you, as I'm going to be continuing to share more, and obviously the numbers I mentioned before that I haven't talked about in this particular presentation. So thanks again for listening. Have a great day. Bye for now.